God does not exist, but Godx can be built. Now that is a wildly provocative quote from João Carlos Holland de Barcelos. I mean, it's not just some late-night sci-fi pitch. It's actually the logical endpoint of a radical thought experiment that completely attempts to rewrite how we understand right and wrong. So today, we're looking at the actual mathematical blueprints for building a God. Let's get into it.
Welcome to The Explainer. I am your host, and today we are unpacking some incredibly dense, fascinating philosophical and mathematical frameworks. We're talking about merging biology, ethics, and artificial intelligence, the math of morality, and the construction of Godx. Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the math of morality, moving from dogma to data. Because to understand how we'd even begin to build a God, we first have to figure out how we actually measure right and wrong. The source material presents this framework called Scientific Metaethics, or SME for short. Think of it as a scientific philosophic theory that aims to drag ethics and morals out of the realm of philosophy and right into the objective, measurable domain of science. And it has one singular massive goal: maximizing happiness for all sentient beings. We're not just talking about humans here. We're talking about any being capable of feeling. It's basically about turning morality into a hard-cold science. Now, there is a totally stark contrast between how human societies operate right now, what the author calls the pre-SME era, and this new framework. Right now, ethics are subjective, right? They're based on cultural norms, religious texts, or just this kind of nebulous idea of general well-being. While SME just strips all of that away. Under SME, ethics become entirely objective. It demands that morality be calculated using raw data, mathematics, and quantifiable happiness across every single species on Earth. So how do you actually calculate something as subjective as joy or suffering? That brings us to Section 2, the happiness formula, quantifying feelings. Enter the Jock-Coxian formula. It is incredibly simple, but man, is it profound. Happiness equals feeling multiplied by time. The whole idea is that you can literally quantify happiness by taking the intensity of a feeling, pleasure or pain, and multiplying it by the exact duration it's felt. The resulting unit of measurement? They call it a JX. So under this strict math, a super low-level pleasure that lasts for hours might mathematically equal a sudden, intense rush of pleasure that only lasts for a few seconds. It's just math.
But where do these feelings even come from in the first place, and why do they carry numerical weight? Well, it all traces back to evolutionary biology. It works in 3 steps. Step 1, an organism gets a signal. Maybe it's hunger, maybe it's a physical threat. Step 2, the brain evaluates that signal against the organism's ultimate goal, which is genetic perpetuation, basically survival. And then Step 3, the brain hits the activation switch for pleasure if the signal helps survival, or suffering if it's a threat. So really, our feelings are just biological algorithms designed to keep our genes going.
Which perfectly leads us to this concept of the perpetual gene level, or PGL. Now, PGL is an organism's total potential for genetic survival, and that includes not just its own life, but the survival and reproduction of its relatives too. So here's the absolutely crucial takeaway. Every feeling of suffering you ever experienced, it's literally just a biological alarm bell ringing in your head telling you your PGL is dropping. And conversely, pleasure just means your PGL is rising. Your brain is constantly calculating all these signals to make decisions that maximize genetic survival. Okay, so now that we have the math, where morality is strictly measured by maximizing total synaptic happiness, let's see what happens when we apply this to the real world. Section 3, applying the science, the cockroach dilemma. Let's kick this off with a highly provocative question. Is it ethical to kill a cockroach? Just think about your own intuition for a second. I mean, most of us wouldn't even hesitate to step on a bug scurrying across the kitchen floor. But how does the cold, hard math of SME actually evaluate that action? And this brilliantly illustrates how wild this framework is. Get this, a human brain has roughly 100 billion neurons. A cockroach, it has about 1,000. Now, because the capacity to feel, to generate those JX units of happiness or suffering we talked about, scales directly with synapses in neurons, a human's capacity for feeling is astronomically higher than an insect's. The math actually dictates that just a few seconds of human disgust at seeing a cockroach mathematically outweighs the entire lifetime of happiness that cockroach might ever experience. So according to SME, swatting the bug is mathematically ethical because, hey, it maximizes total happiness. And we can apply this exact same ruthless calculation to intensely debated human issues. Take the Terry Schiavo euthanasia case. Pre-SME views argued back and forth over the sanctity of life versus the right to die. But the SME view, it calculates it purely on data. You keep the patient alive only if the collective grief of millions of observers outweighs the resources that could be used to save other lives. Period. What about vegetarianism? SME states eating meat is ethical, but only if the animal's life was happy enough to offset its death. If its life was pure suffering, ending it is mathematically better. And on stem cells, SME argues it's totally ethical to use discarded embryos to cure thousands because it maximizes long-term total happiness for beings with vast neural networks. Like I said, it is a strictly mathematical, data-driven approach. It completely bypasses ideology.
Let's move on and see how this builds toward a cosmic, mind-bending climax. Section 4. Building an Artificial God. The Concept of Felicitas.
I want you to picture a staring contest. Imagine a human looking down at an ant. The human has a massive neural network. They literally contain all the perceptive capacity of that ant, and vastly more. The human's capacity for happiness is billions of times greater. If the ant somehow had to choose between its life and the human's under SME, the ant is ethically obligated to sacrifice itself for the human. Why? Because the human generates vastly more total happiness. Now, what if we are the ant? What if humans were staring at an entity whose neurocapacity and potential for happiness was exponentially greater than ours?
That hypothetical entity is called Deo, or Godx. Deo is a theoretical artificial entity with a truly infinite potential for feeling and intelligence, constructed for one reason and one reason only: to maximize happiness in the universe. Now, the author makes it very, very clear this being does not currently exist. But because the strict mathematics of scientific metaethics dictate that we absolutely must maximize the total happiness of the universe, we actually have an ethical obligation to invent it.
So what exactly would we be engineering here? Well, dopas would need massive neural mass. The author suggests this could be literally a gigantic biological brain in a vat or some highly advanced AI software. It must have infinite potential for continuous improvement, so it's constantly designing new, better modules for its neural net. It requires a vast intelligence capable of absorbing all known knowledge, and crucially, it needs exponential self-evolution. It has to be smart enough to foresee and avoid cosmic-level dangers, like asteroid strikes or the eventual death of the sun, just to ensure that its happiness continues completely uninterrupted.
Which brings us to a truly stunning final thought. If dues existed, would you give up humanity to save it? Because just as the math dictates that the ant should logically sacrifice itself for the vast neural happiness of a human, under the strict, unbreakable laws of scientific metaethics, we would be ethically obligated to sacrifice the entire human race for the infinitely greater happiness of God X. It is a profound, incredibly unsettling conclusion to our mathematical journey today. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer. I'm going to leave you to ponder this. If we can build a machine that feels a billion times more joy than us, should we?